Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make a couple gift card holders that are also fun and interactive. We're going to use my new Snowglobe stamp set from Rubber Stamp Tapestry, as well as their new sentiment stamp, which has so many great sentiments for adding to your cards and adding just the right touch, and also some little icons that are really handy if you just want to fill in here and there on an envelope or tag. So these are definitely going to be on my table all Christmas long as I'm getting presents wrapped. So I have to admit, I often don't buy physical gifts. I usually get gift cards, but sometimes I feel kind of lame if I don't have an actual present, if it's just a gift card. So I find making a really nice card to go with it is super handy. And I'm also going to show you how to make these really thick envelopes, so it's almost like a box and an envelope, and you don't need any special tools. I'm using a scoring board. You can get by without one, but it does help if you have one. I will tell you that. So what I want to show you here is a way to make the card that you're going to give part of a present, but also a reusable present. Because you know, like when you get your present in a fancy gift bag, you can save that bag and reuse it again. Well, that's the same principle to this card. So what I would recommend is tying on a tag and putting a to and from on it, and then tying the envelope box up with ribbon. That way you don't have to put adhesive on the flap, and it can be reused again, because this is kind of a thick card and it would be difficult to find another envelope if they wanted to reuse it. So we're going to make some really cute shaker cards. They're so fun, and you'll see they're really thick, so that's why we wanted that thick box. Now inside the card is a pocket for a gift card, but I also thought it'd be cool to just take a scrap of cardstock or pattern paper that was light in pattern and stick that in there too, and put your to and from on there, your Merry Christmas, thank you for being my friend, hope you have a great season, whatever you want to put on there. I'm not very wordy in my cards, so having a little piece like this is great, and then when they take their gift card out, they can take out the little note and they can reuse it to give a gift card to somebody else. So I love things like that that can be recycled and reused. I'm going to show you this other one we're going to make today, and I hope that you enjoy this project, because we're going to be doing coloring, stamping, embossing, layering, building these really fun shaker cards, and also the envelope. So I'll link up all the products down below in the video description, along with a coupon code to Rubber Stamp Tapestry. And without further ado, let's get to the project. I started off my stamping on some Neenah cardstock, and I wasn't sure how much of the panel I would end up keeping, so I'm going to stamp it in the middle of these white panels that are 1/4 of a sheet of cardstock. I'm using Memento ink because I know I'm going to be using alcohol pens to color this with, and that's also why I'm using the Neenah Solar White cardstock, just because it's so nice for using alcohol pens. So this one here, we're going to do our little snowmen, and there's a family of 3 snowmen included in this Snowglobe set, and since I want them to be kind of clustered together, I want to do some masking. So to do that, I simply stamped out my snowman on a post-it note and cut it out, and then I'm just setting him on top of the snowman I stamped on the good paper. Another reason I have that larger piece of paper there, it looks really wasteful, I know, I'm sorry, is so I could test my marker colors on the margins and stuff. So there's another tip for you. So after I got the little guy stamped, I'm going to stamp the dad and then the mom. And I basically wanted to use the snowmen so they'd be looking in towards their snow son or snow daughter. But that's the main reason for that. I think when you pull the interest to the center, it just looks really nice, looks very family-like. And then I went ahead and masked over my other 2 snow people so I could stamp the kind of rolling hills of snow, and we're also going to do some stamping of stars in the background. It's important to think about how you're going to be coloring these images when you're stamping them. Like, I don't have to worry about anything going outside of my snow globe, so I can adjust that hill higher or lower however I want. I can also stamp these stars and let them go outside of the globe if I want to, because I know this is going to be hidden by another layer. I like keeping the masks on because, again, I don't have to worry about stamping over my snowman when I have it like this, so I can really just do my stamping how I feel like it's going to balance out the best, rather than trying to keep away from everything. So that's another reason to use masks. Now, I just stuck those to the back of the packaging that my stamp set came on, so that way I can reuse them. Now I'm also going to get the stamping done for my other card while I'm at it, so that way I can put away my stamp pads and blocks and stamps, and then I can do all my coloring. So when you're making cards, try to think of how you can you can work, kind of do all the same steps together and then put those away and then do the next steps together, and etc., etc. For the little base of my snow globe, which is going to be layered, one of the last layers on my card, I just stamped them on a scrap of craft cardstock. That's where all those little offcuts, when you like make a 5x7 card, you end up with that little strip. Those are perfect for stamping sentiments or stamping, like if you're doing any paper piecing. So if you have room to store them, keep them because they will be handy. I just recently went through my my stamp and paper storage today, and I just kind of weeded out some papers that were bent, or the pattern was kind of out of date, or I didn't think I would use because they were too small, because my scrap bin was overflowing. So you might need to do that once a year just to keep things from getting too overwhelming. The thing I really like about this base is that the pattern of the wood grain does not go to the center, so you can either stamp the book plate in there and use teeny tiny letters or typewriter writing or something, or you can stamp these larger sentiments in that are new from Rubber Stamp Tapestry that are designed to go with the 3 stamp sets that I designed for them this Christmas. I love to have my stamp sets work together, and I also think those are really good sizes for other projects as well. So now I'm going to use some alcohol pens to do my coloring, and this is what I meant about testing on the margin, because you're not going to see that. We'll actually end up cutting that away, but I wanted to do kind of like a I wanted kind of the look of like maybe sunset, or maybe like the city lights kind of glowing and lighting up the sky, or maybe northern lights, something that's a little more festive than just a plain flat sky on this one. Because all of the stamping is pretty much done with that row of houses, I didn't have to mix stuff around and match stuff. I wanted the background to be really vibrant and fun. I started working with my darkest kind of midnight purple color, and I added that right over my the border of my snow globe, and I'm going to work basically dark to light. I prefer to work dark to light, but I do have some tricky to blend colors here. I've got purples and reds. Those are really tough to blend, and I am making a huge jump from that midnight purple all the way to a bright yellow. So I'm going to share some tips here as we go along so that you can have a little easier time when you're blending. I think the first tip when you're working with markers, if you want to do a lot of blending, is to get the right cardstock. And this Neenah Classic Crest is just the most easy to blend for me. I find that like if I was doing this on some other papers, the colors would just kind of overlap and streak and not really want to merge together at all. So that's one tip. And the other tip is to overlap. So as I'm going in with a color, I am overlapping the previous color, and what that's doing is preventing the paper from drying and preventing a hard edge because of dry paper. So those probably 2 tips are the best when you're working with markers, because you're not always going to have 2 colors that blend perfectly together. You might want to do a huge jump like I'm doing here, and that's kind of going to be a challenge. But if your paper's good and you're keeping that paper wet and saturated, you're going to have a much easier time. You'll know that your paper is saturated if you flip it over to the back and you can see all of that color on the back side. You won't see your stamping lines, but you'll see the color has filled in, and then you'll know you'll get a decent blend. I decided to go ahead and color the buildings on the ground just so I had a good idea of how everything was going to look. And then I went ahead with a clear blending marker, and I used a chisel edge, and I'm going to go ahead and color over the entire background just to help those colors merge. And if you do need to help them blend more, go over with your colors one more time, and you'll get a really nice smooth blend and a super rich color. Now the snowman one was actually a lot easier to color. I just did the background with a couple shades of light blue ink, and I'm using the Blick Studio markers, and I have one Copic there. They both work really well together. In fact, I think the Blick Studio is probably the closest to Copics if you're looking for a more budget-friendly option. The tips are identical, which usually the brush tips aren't as good as a Copic, but I'd have to say those are. So now I want to do a little bit of I want snow to look like it's snowing here on the background scene. Even though we're going to have shaker stuff, I feel like I just want a little bit of really bright white snow. So I stamped the dots that came with a set with clear Versamark ink, and then used white embossing powder to heat emboss them. And I just think that looks fantastic with those super bright colors. Contrast is really important when you're card making because it just looks great. And so now what I'm using is fun foam for my dimensional layer to make my shaker cards, because it's so much easier than using strips and strips of foam tape. I just made sure I cut the front panel of my card and the foam together. Do it so that the die is against the foam so it doesn't crush your paper, and that way I know they're going to line up perfectly when I go to make my card. The steps are the same for making either of these cards. So I trimmed off the excess around my little snow globe innards, and I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to the back of my foam. That's just a little bit easier to do this on its own first and then adhere that whole thing to the panel. And I'm just using my ATG adhesive, which worked really well. I thought I was going to have to use score tape for this, but actually the ATG stuck to the foam. I thought it wouldn't, but luckily it did, because that was a lot easier. And I'm also going to do the front decorating of my panel before I glue that all together, because I realized when I was making the other card that it's a lot easier if you just do all that decorating first, because if you decide you want to add a brad or an embellishment or tie a ribbon around it after you've glued it all down, you can, or it looks really awkward. So do that front panel decorating first. Now for my window sheet, all I'm using is a piece of inkjet transparency film. It's the same stuff I use for stamping and all sorts of other different projects. So I had it, and it's great to have a multi-use product like that. I filled the recess with glitter and some little star sequins, and then put that transparency over it. And I'm just finishing up decorating this front panel. I have these little brads, and they have a hole in them for ribbon, and I thought they were really fun, and it would be nice to use that on this card. I also thought it'd be fun to take some of the scraps of the leftover paper from my other card and make some little photo corners so they could kind of decorate the corners, because it is kind of a simple card, and it's like, geez, I put all this work into it and it still looked pretty simple. So I wanted to have a few different embellishments that were kind of worthy of a card that you've put this much time into. I used foam adhesive to put the little base of the snow globe on there to make it stand out a little bit, and then because I felt like it needed a little something to break it out a little more, I used some glitter pens. These are the Jane Davenport glitzy pens, and I used them to outline my snow globe to kind of look like a frosted glass dome, and to add a little kind of sparkle around the base. And here you can see both of them. As you can see, same design. They look a little different because they're different colors and whatnot, but I thought they were really cute. And for the inside pocket, I just took a scrap of cardstock and made myself a little pocket glued down on 3 sides, and there the gift card can go. And that's pretty much it. We're going to make an envelope box today, and it's very similar to how I usually make an envelope. I measure corner to corner, but this time instead of adding 1 inch, I'm adding 1.5 inches so that I can have about 1/8 of an inch thick box. Add more length, add more to that dimension if you want to have a thicker box. Okay, so if you want a 1/4 inch thick box, add 2 inches to your final length. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so if you have a score pal, this is going to be really easy, or any sort of scoring board. There you can see how nice and thick and protected that's going to be. But if you don't, you'll just have to be more careful with your folding. So what you want to do is center your card up on your paper, and you're going to make a score line. So instead of folding it around like you would if we were just making a regular envelope, you're making a score line where you would fold. Then you're going to make another score line 1/8 of an inch away. Now, of course, adjust that. If you want a thicker box, you make that second score line further away. And then I like to fold down this piece on the closest to the center score line to get the rest of my measurements, because it's a little bit easier. So once I have that butted up nice and snug, because you don't have to account for extra room in the edge, because this is going to fit nice and snug because you're making the thickness up on the sides, on the gussets, then you're going to score right up against that card. And again, you're going to score 1/8 of an inch out from that. Okay, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm using that kind of first score we made as a squaring arm, and I'm going to do the same thing on either of the long sides of this card. Okay, so you score it once really close to the card, and then again 1/8 of an inch out for this side. So adjust it. If you want it a 1/4 inch thick, make the cuts make the score lines 1/4 inch apart. So now you want to cut out the entire center. See that? You're cutting right into that first score line. You're not going to have anything overlapping in the corners. They're going to butt up to each other and close. And I am trimming off the bottom of the envelope like I usually do, so it'll be nice and neat. And then I like to put the card back in while I am adhering the bottom, just for a little stability. You don't have to keep them in there at this point, but this is going to help you glue it down, because that card is so solid and thick. It's going to give you a really nice bit of kind of resistance there as you're gluing down. And then I'm just using my ATG gun. If you feel like that adhesive is not strong enough, you can go with some like score tape or something like that. And there you can see the finished card. Now I'm not going to adhere the front. I would wait till I'm either ready to give that away, or like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I would just wrap it with ribbon and add a tag so the whole thing can be reused. So that way I wouldn't write in the card, I'd just stick in a little note with a post-it note or on a scrap of cardstock so that so it can be reused, because it's nice if the things you make can have a second life. And I was really thrilled with how these envelopes came out, because they were so easy. I actually had a fancy template that made envelope boxes, but this is so much easier, and most people have a scoring tool, so I figure all the better. And you can put that through the mail with an extra stamp, or you can hand deliver it. Obviously, if you put it through the mail, you will have to adhere it down permanently and write on it, but it's nice to have options. I want to thank pegstamps.com, Rubber Stamp Tapestry, for sponsoring this video today. I'll have all the products I used linked up in the video description so you can find these stamp sets and more. This was super fun, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.